My father divided the inheritance, 90% for my brother and only 10% for me. When I discovered the secret safe deposit box, my world collapsed. Old documents, family secrets, and a truth no one could have imagined. A journey of justice, forgiveness, and discoveries that transformed not only my life, but the destiny of an entire town. Prepare yourself for a story of courage that will touch your heart. Subscribe, leave a like, and comment where you're watching from. I never imagined that at 52, I would be relearning the meaning of the word family. I was always that daughter, the responsible one, the dedicated one, the one who gave up dreams to be present. 10 years caring for my father while my brother built his brilliant life miles away. 10 years of patiently given baths, of medications, managed at the right time, of conversations repeated as if new each morning. And then, in an office smelling of old paper and cold coffee, I heard the words that reduced me to a fraction. 10% of the assets to Ms. Eleanor Vance, 90% to Mr. Robert Vance. The lawyer, Mr. Miller, didn't even lift his eyes from the papers when he pronounced my sentence. Beside me, Robert adjusted his Italian tie and rehearsed a look of surprise that wouldn't convince even the church ladies at the potluck. 90%. The apartment in the capital, the country house, the investments, the land, all for him. For me, the crumbs remained. A small savings account and the old '76 Ford Pinto. My father refused to sell for sentimental value. Ironic that the sentimental value was directed precisely at me. Eleanor, Dad was always very fair, Robert tried as we left the office. The midday West Virginia sun beat down on the old brick street, and I felt each uneven brick under my feet like little stabs. Robert, please, spare me your rehearsed speeches. You barely called once a month. I returned to the house where I grew up, temporarily mine, until Robert decided to sell it too. The peeling walls held more of my stories than any inheritance could compensate for. In the living room, the framed photographs told a well-constructed lie: the happy family, the proud father, the 2 smiling children. No one would see in the photos the nights I stayed awake when my father had pneumonia. No one would see the lost Sundays, the boyfriends who left, the shelved plans. Professor Vance was always the picture of filial devotion, commented Mrs. Gable at the local bakery the next morning, casually, though wanting all the details. In this small town, news travels faster than a summer downpour. A shame not all sacrifices are recognized, isn't it? I smiled, that smile I learned to use as a shield. Well, Mrs. Gable, life's like that, full of surprises. I paid for the loaf of bread I could barely swallow and left before the lump in my throat turned into something more embarrassing. The narrow streets I'd known since childhood now seemed like a suffocating maze. Every greeting, every glance, every good morning carried a subtext I could read clearly. Poor Eleanor. Even her own father didn't value her sacrifice. When I got home, I found a plain manila envelope on the coffee table, the kind used for official mail. Inside, an old key and a note in my father's unmistakable handwriting. For Eleanor, to be opened after the reading of the will. The key was heavy, made of ornate metal, belonging to another time. The note contained only one instruction: First National Bank, Main Branch, Safe Deposit Box, 1937. I swallowed back the tears threatening to overwhelm me. My father, always methodical, always full of secrets. Even after death, he continued to control the steps of everyone around him. What now? Some memory with no financial value, but loaded with cheap sentimentality. Perhaps a posthumous apology. That would change absolutely nothing. I put the key in my purse, determined to solve this final enigma as soon as possible. The next day, I took the first bus to Charleston. 3 hours on the road with my face turned to the window, watching. The West Virginia mountains that had always seemed eternal and unchanging, unlike people. The First National Bank maintained its imposing facade downtown, an Art Deco building resisting the modernity of glass and steel taking over the surroundings. Box 1937 hasn't been opened in over 30 years. Ma'am, the manager informed me after a series of bureaucratic checks. We'll need some time to locate it properly. I have all the time in the world, I replied, sitting down in the leather armchair in the lobby. Literally, all the time. The manager didn't catch the irony, but he didn't need to. My entire life had been put on hold to care for someone else. A few more hours wouldn't make a difference. When they finally led me to the vault room, I felt a knot in my stomach. What? Could my father have kept with such mystery? The bank employee left me alone after opening the box, which revealed a metal case and some envelopes yellowed with age. I sat at the small available table and began to examine the contents. The first envelope contained photographs I had never seen. My father, young, next to a woman who was not my mother. On the back of one, the inscription, "Larissa and I, 1975, a year before my birth." I continued exploring and found what appeared to be a diary, carefully bound in leather. On the first page, the dedication, "So the truth is not lost, as I almost lost you." I started reading right there, unable to contain my curiosity. The first pages revealed a man I never knew, passionate, impetuous, full of dreams. My father wrote about his secret investments, about wealth built silently, away from society's eyes and especially away from my mother's eyes. Page after page, I discovered that the austere man I knew had been a bold investor, buying stocks when no one believed, acquiring land in areas that later skyrocketed in value. Between the diary pages, I found property deeds, stock certificates, purchase and sale agreements, an entire fortune not mentioned in the will. A fortune that, according to the last pages of the diary, had been transferred to a foundation in my name. Eleanor, read the last entry, dated just 3 months before his death. When you read this, you will likely be confused and hurt by my choices. The official will is just a facade, a final lesson I wanted to teach you and your brother. Robert always believed money was the measure of everything. I let him think he would inherit almost everything to see his true character. As for you, my daughter, you always underestimated your own strength. You dedicated yourself so much to others that you forgot to live your own life. This is your true legacy, the Eleanor Vance Foundation, with assets 5 times greater than everything I left in the official will. But there is one condition. You will have to fight for it. It won't be easy. Robert will do everything to keep what he believes is rightfully his. Use your intelligence. Learn to be strong without ceasing to be fair. And remember, sometimes we need to lose everything to discover who we really are. I left the bank feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. But for the first time in years, this weight didn't crush me. It strengthened me. On the bus back to the small town of Harmony Creek, I looked again at the West Virginia mountains. But this time they didn't seem immutable. They seemed challenging, imposing, like the path ahead of me. When I arrived home, Robert was already there, accompanied by a man in a suit who was gesturing while pointing to different parts of the living room. "Ah, Eleanor, good. You're here," my brother said with that smile he used to impress clients. "We're just doing an initial appraisal of the house. I think we can get a good price, especially if we modernize the kitchen before putting it on the market." I took a deep breath, feeling a calm I hadn't known in years. "I don't think selling the house now is a good idea, Robert." "What do you mean?" "The will is clear, Eleanor. I understand you're attached, but I am the legal owner of 90% of the assets, including this house." "Really? Interesting. And the Eleanor Vance Foundation? Are you the owner of that too?" I saw Robert's face turn pale. The man in the suit looked confusedly from one to the other, and my brother quickly dismissed him, promising to continue the conversation another day. When we were alone, Robert poured himself a generous dose of the bourbon our father kept for special occasions. "I don't know what you're talking about, Eleanor. Dad didn't have any foundation." "Funny, because I have documents here that prove otherwise." I took some of the copies I had made at the bank from my purse. And you know what the most interesting part is? The foundation's assets are approximately 5 times greater than everything listed in the official will. Robert choked on his bourbon. "Is this some kind of joke? Some trick you and Dad cooked up against me?" "No, Robert. It's what our father called the final lesson. For both of us, actually. I sat in the old leather armchair where Dad used to read the newspaper. He wanted to see what you would do, believing you had everything, and what I would do, believing I had nothing. And what are you going to do, Eleanor? Sue me? Contest the will? No, Robert. I'm going to propose a deal. You keep what you received in the official will, with one condition. The lands where the small farmers are will not be sold. They have depended on that land for generations. And the foundation? I'll take over the foundation, as Dad wished. But don't worry. Part of the funds will be used to create an educational center on the family land. I'm sure that will increase the value of your other properties in the region. I smiled, savoring the irony of the situation. After all, an educational venture with national recognition will certainly bring development to the town, don't you think? In the months that followed, I discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed. I faced arrogant lawyers who tried to intimidate me with legal jargon. Ma'am, do you understand the complexity of managing a foundation of this size? One of them asked, the type of man who never looked directly at a woman when discussing business. Sir, I replied calmly, I taught literature to teenagers for 30 years. Believe me, no administrative complexity compares to keeping 25 teenagers interested in Faulkner on a Friday afternoon. I imagine managing a foundation will be a piece of cake in comparison. Robert tried to contest the authenticity of the diary and the documents, but the evidence was irrefutable. The stocks, the investments, everything was meticulously recorded. My father might have had many flaws, but disorganization was never one of them. While the legal dispute unfolded, I began to investigate the foundation's beneficiaries. I discovered that, secretly, my father had funded the education of dozens of talented young people from the region. Many of them had returned to town and now held important positions in the community. The doctor at the health clinic, the principal of the local school, the engineer who designed the town's water catchment system. All had received anonymous scholarships from my father's foundation. During the traditional annual harvest festival, I observed these former students with new eyes. As colorful stalls decorated the town square and the smell of home-baked goods filled the air, I realized the silent impact my father had had on the community. He never talked about it, never sought recognition. It was a side of him I had never known. Ms. Vance, Dr. Evans, the local physician, approached me while I was buying funnel cake at the church booth. I heard you took over your father's foundation. I wanted to thank you personally. Without the scholarship I received, I never would have been able to attend medical school. He never told me about it, doctor. Your father was a private man. He used to say that good done in silence has more value. The doctor smiled. He would be proud to see you continuing his work. Those words moved me in an unexpected way. All the resentment I felt upon reading the will began to give way to a deeper understanding of my father's intentions. It wasn't just about money or property. It was about a legacy of transformation. Meanwhile, Robert was facing his own demons. I found out, through an old college friend of his who approached me privately, that my brother was drowning in debt. The professional success he boasted about was largely a facade. He had made risky investments, taken out loans to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't afford, and now saw the inheritance as a lifeline for his financial problems. This revelation could have filled me with vindictive satisfaction, but instead, I felt a deep sadness. Robert and I had followed such different paths, but we were both caught in traps of our own making. I, in the self-denial I confused with filial duty. He, in the greed he confused with success. On a rainy afternoon, typical of early West Virginia winter, Robert showed up at the house unannounced. He looked different, without the impeccable suit, without the rehearsed smile, without the posture of someone who dominates the world. He seemed older and tired. "Eleanor, I need to talk to you," he said, dripping water onto the living room rug. I offered him a towel and a cup of coffee. For a moment I saw in him the boy who used to run through the house with scraped knees, asking me to tell stories on stormy nights. That boy had been lost for so long that I had almost forgotten his existence. "I'm broke, Eleanor," he confessed after a long silence. "I owe more than I can pay. The land I sold barely covered the interest on my debts. And now," his voice broke, "now the creditors are threatening lawsuits that could ruin my reputation. And what do you expect me to do, Robert? Use the foundation's money to cover your debts? Is that it? It would be temporary, he argued, with a trace of the old manipulative Robert. I'd pay it back with interest. You know I've always been good with investments. I couldn't help a dry laugh. Apparently not as good as you thought, right? He lowered his eyes, defeated. You're right. I messed everything up. I've always been an arrogant idiot who thought he could buy the world. Tears began to stream down his face. Dad was right about me. I don't deserve anything he left. That confession, as unexpected as it was sincere, disrupted my carefully laid plans for confrontation. Instead of the satisfaction I imagined feeling seeing Robert defeated, I only experienced the weight of the responsibility my father had placed on my shoulders. It wasn't about punishing Robert or proving my worth. It was about honoring a greater legacy. I'm not paying your debts, Robert, I finally said, but I'll offer you something you may never have had. A chance to start over. For real. I explained. My proposal. Robert would work on the educational center project I planned to build. He would use his business knowledge to help structure the administrative side, while learning about the real impact education could have on people's lives. In return, he would receive a salary that would allow him to pay off his debts gradually, and would have a place to live. Our parents' house, which would remain in the family. Why would you do this for me, Eleanor? After everything I did, how I treated you. I looked out the window. The rain had lessened, and a faint rainbow was beginning to form over the mountains. I'm not doing this for you, Robert. I'm doing this for me, for Dad, and for the legacy he wanted to build. I turned to face him. But mostly, I'm doing this because, contrary to what I always thought, I have a choice, and I choose not to be consumed by resentment. In the following months, I dove headfirst into creating the Eleanor Vance Educational Center. I hired education experts, sought partnerships with universities, and developed a program that combined traditional knowledge of sustainable agriculture with modern technologies. I wanted the young people of the region to find opportunities without having to abandon their roots. Robert, surprisingly, took on his role with a dedication he had never shown before. The practical work, the contact with local farmers, the simplicity of life in the countryside, all seemed to awaken something dormant in him. Gradually, the arrogant man I knew gave way to someone more reflective, more conscious. 1 year after the reading of the will, we inaugurated the Eleanor Vance Educational Center. The small town of Harmony Creek had never seen anything like it. Officials from across the state attended, attracted by the innovative proposal. Journalists recorded every detail, fascinated by the story of the retired teacher who transformed a controversial inheritance into a revolutionary project. In the inauguration speech, I avoided mentioning the circumstances that led me there. Instead, I spoke about dreams, about roots, about the importance of building bridges between the past and the future. When I finished, the audience gave a standing ovation, and I saw in those people's eyes something I never sought: recognition. After the ceremony, while guests mingled at the reception organized by the sustainable gastronomy students themselves, I found an envelope in my office. Inside, a key, different from the first, but equally old, and a note, for Eleanor, to be opened 1 year after the discovery of the safe deposit box. I immediately recognized my father's handwriting. How was this possible? Who had left this envelope? I looked around, but no one was there. Only the portrait of my father on the wall, with that enigmatic half-smile that always intrigued me. The key fit a small, carved wooden box that sat in my father's old study, now transformed into a study room at the educational center. Inside the box, I found a letter and an old photograph. Me, age 10, sitting on the porch with an open book on my lap. My dearest Eleanor, the letter began, if you are reading this, it means you followed the path I hoped for, not out of obedience, but out of your own choice. I always knew you would find the right path, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. The division of the will was my last and most difficult test for you both. Robert needed to learn that there are values money can't buy. You needed to learn that your worth isn't just in what you do for others, but in what you are capable of building when you believe in yourself. The true inheritance I leave is not the properties, the investments, or even the foundation. The true inheritance is this community you helped strengthen, these young people who will have opportunities we never had, this balance between tradition and innovation that you knew how to create. Forgive this old man for his unconventional methods. Forgive the father who didn't always know how to express his pride and admiration. And most importantly, forgive yourself for all the times you confuse sacrifice with love. Always remember, we are like these West Virginia mountains, strong, resilient, capable of weathering storms without losing our essence. And like them, our true value lies not in what others see, but in the hidden springs that nourish the life around us. With all my love, eternally, your father. Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't tears of sadness or resentment. They were tears of understanding, of acceptance, of a reconciliation that transcended time and death. I held the letter close to my heart and walked out onto the porch, where the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The same scenery I had seen thousands of times throughout my life, but which now seemed completely new. Robert approached silently and stood beside me, contemplating the horizon. He planned everything, didn't he? He asked after a long silence. Every detail, I confirmed, right down to the last moment. I used to think I understood Dad better than you, that we were more alike, more connected. And now? Now I think neither of us really knew him. Or maybe he was a little bit of both of us. Your dedication, my ambition, and something more. Something we're just beginning to discover. I nodded, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in years. I think that's how it is, Robert. People are like icebergs. We only show a small part of who we are. The rest is submerged, invisible even to those we love most. And sometimes invisible even to ourselves, he completed, with a wisdom that surprised me. We stood there, side by side, watching the day end in silence. We were no longer the self-sacrificing daughter and the ungrateful son. We were just two imperfect people trying to honor a legacy that went far beyond wills and properties. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I put on comfortable clothes and walked to the top of the hill behind the educational center. It was my father's favorite spot where he used to go to clear his head, as he put it. I sat on the dew-damp grass and waited. As the first rays of sun began to gild the mountain contours, I felt a familiar warmth in my chest. It wasn't longing, nor regret. It was gratitude. Gratitude for the path taken, for the lessons learned, for the choices made, and yet to be made. At age 53, I finally understood what my father had tried to teach me my whole life, that our true wealth isn't in what we possess, but in what we build. It isn't in what we receive, but in what we are capable of giving. I took a deep breath of the morning air, letting it fill my lungs with new possibilities. The educational center was just the beginning. There was so much still to do, so many lives to touch, so many dreams to fulfill. Thank you, Dad, I whispered to the wind, for the inheritance that truly matters. And then, with a light heart and a renewed soul, I stood up to face another day. Not as the heiress of 10% of a material fortune, but as the guardian of an infinitely more valuable legacy, a legacy of transformation, of growth, of love in its highest form. In the small town of Harmony Creek, nestled in the West Virginia mountains, a new story was beginning to be written. And this time, I wasn't just a secondary character in someone else's narrative. I was the author of my own journey, writing each page with the ink of experience, resilience, and above all, the freedom to choose my own path. And that, I discovered, was the greatest inheritance anyone could receive.